It's August the 10th, 2022, and the NFL season is right around the corner. In fact, preseason is about to kick off tomorrow. And normally, this is a waiver wire Wednesday that we're upon us, and we were currently scouting around the landscape trying to figure out who can we add to our roster. You smell that? That's football being in the air. You smell that? That is the sound of the hardware being placed on your shelf in a couple of months. You feel that? That's the feelings of electricity pumping through your veins, knowing that fantasy football is now here. And who is your source for everything that you need in the fantasy football world? In the perspective, where perspective is king? Here at Fantasy Vibes. What's wavy? I'm your man, MoonVibes, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this experience that is Fantasy Vibes. We want to love on you, show you appreciation. Shout out to all the people that's watching on whatever platform that you get a chance to experience this content on. You're greatly appreciated. Make sure you hit us with that 5 stars on Spotify. It greatly helps for the expansion of our podcast and to get it out there. Really, make sure you leave a review if this content impacts you in any way, even in a negative way. We wanna take all of it that comes with this atmosphere. Now, speaking of atmosphere, this would not be what it is without Real Ones Productions. So before we get started, shameless plug to the guys. Make sure you check out realonesproductions.com. Why do you need to check out realonesproductions.com? Because they are your source for everything that you need in the NBA, NFL, college football, and fantasy. We got you covered. We got you locked. So check out realonesproductions.com because they sponsored this episode and every single episode of Fantasy Vibes. So that's a little shameless plug for you. Now, let's get into the show. Today's show, we got real talk. None of it we getting started without that. We got latest news, fact or fiction. We'll be talking about a couple of players that, should we believe the hype or should we be fading it? Is it fact or is it fiction? We're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about a mock draft, getting you prepared for this season coming up. And we got to make sure we continue to have iron sharpen iron. We got to get each other better. So I'm going to be doing a mock draft for you, joining against real people in Sleeper, and we're going to see how we can build a roster based on where we are right now in August, because mock drafts that we did in June are nowhere close to what mock drafts are going to be looking like in August. So that is a fact. Make sure you check us out, though. Make sure you check us out. World of MoonVibes on YouTube. Shameless plug. World of MoonVibes on YouTube. That's where all the fantasy content you can find from me is on that platform. But none of this will be able to get started without my favorite segment, the main enchilada, the grand big daddy of them all. Not the granddaddy, gotta put respect on the Rose Bowl, but the big daddy of them all. I'm talking about Real Talk, presented by Real Ones Productions. You know how we kick the show off. Let's get it started. This running back that I'm about to talk about went last year, running back 38 on the board, and he finished that way. Last year, he played in 13 games, pretty good. 162 carries, 500, almost 600 yards. He had a 3.7 yard average with only 2 touchdowns rushing. Underwhelming, right, Moon? Yeah. But if you talk about targets, he had 57 targets. About almost 250, almost 260 yards receiving with 2 more touchdowns. Now, if you wanted to be nitpicky, you could say, oh, well, Moon, he only had 4 total touchdowns, and this man had 2 fumbles on the season. You're a running back. You cannot fumble. That is a no. That's a no. If you wanted to be even more discouraging on this player, because, perspective matters and where you sit determines what you see, and what you see determines your outlook on the situation. I could say that this player had an average of 8.3 fantasy points per game last season. So why is he even in the topic of conversation? Well, let me explain. Notable players that had a higher fantasy points per game than this man included the league leader in fantasy points per game, Derrick Henry, who averaged 21 points per game. That is ridiculous. And he only played 8 games, had 10 touchdowns. Crazy. I know. Najee Harris, all the big guys you can think of. Yep. But some of the guys that you don't really expect to have higher points per game than him, AJ Dillon. You remember Jordan Howard playing in Philly last year? Yep. He had higher points per game. Ramondre Stevenson. Yes, exactly. Devin Singletary, Javonte Williams, who we'll probably talk about a little bit later in the show. Clyde Elvis-Hilaire, James Robinson, even Chris Carson, DeAndre Swift, Daryl Henderson, Josh Jacobs, and Rashad Penny all had higher points per game than this guy that I'm about to talk to you about for a little bit. Who is this mystery guy, Moon? Well, I thought that you would never ask, my friend. I thought that you would never ask. While I queue up what I have to talk about with this guy, he is somebody that is the focus of this real talk. Real talk, say it with my chest. Saquon Barkley will finish as the running back one in 2022 season. Let me say it again. Saquon Barkley will finish as a running back one in 2022 for fantasy football. Why do you believe that, Moon? Well, you can look at the fact that Brian Daboll is there. You now have an offensive-minded head coach. You can look at the fact that his track record speaks that he might not run the ball, but he doesn't have a talent that he's coached that has been on the same caliber as the guy that wears number 26 in blue. That is a fact. Devin Singletary is not like this. Zach Moss is not like this. Do I have to keep going down the list? They're not like this. In other words, he's not that guy. But who is that guy? The guy that you see right there, getting busy. He's him. This year, there's been a lot of people that are slowly coming on to the Saquon Barkley train, but we've been advocating for Saquon Barkley since May. I remember being in a mock draft with a couple of friends of mine and some others. And shout out to Mr. Kellogg, Greg. Me and him had a 2.5 hour conversation on running backs and players that we felt that deserved to be 1.01 overall. Who deserves to be that? He made a case for case for Christian McCaffrey and said that there's no way you can pass up on Christian McCaffrey because his ceiling is just so ridiculously high, Moon, that it just doesn't make sense. It's just ridiculously high. You can't pass up on that, right? We talked about Derrick Henry and how his points per game is just so ridiculous that he's a constant that you don't have to worry about. Plug and play. And he's still going to have the keys to the offense. We talked about Austin Eckler, and if we can believe that, we even talk about some wide receivers on if it's too crazy to draft a Cooper Kupp or Justin Jefferson 1.01. But the player that I mentioned that got a lot of pushback because he was going in the third and fourth round at this point in time in drafts was the guy that you see the highlights of running right now, Saquon Barkley. He said, "What? You would take Saquon?" It was never a question of his talent. You can't question Saquon Barkley's talent. In fact, that's already understood. But you can question, like, okay, the injuries. But when I say that he's only had one major injury, that quiets the noise around him. When we talk about the utilization, opportunity is king in fantasy. How much opportunity do you get? When I look at this backfield and I don't see any competition coming from the guys that's behind him, it's hard to use the word workhorse in the NFL right now when there's so many running backs that are on rosters that are going to be involved. However, when Saquon Barkley puts together 50 plus targets last year in a down season, and they're coming out with reports saying that he is going to be utilized even more this year in the passing game, lining out wide and out of the backfield, that only just makes me feel more excited even more. When I have to look at practice clips and seeing him trucking people in practice, it makes me say to myself, oh, wow, everybody is starting to finally catch up to this Saquon Barkley that we've been talking about for a while now. Even last year, I drafted him. The year before, I drafted him. We can't keep saying this notion that, oh, well, because a player burnt me in the past, and that means that I can't draft him again. No, this is a new season. This is a new day. Fresh anointing coming my way. Come on. Season of power, prosperity. Saquon Barkley. Let me hear you say yes. Yes. That's what I'm talking about. He's blessed. Not only physically gifted, but if this situation goes the way I think, and Daniel Jones is struggling as mightily as it suggests in training camp so far, then we're going to have some really good conversations on why Saquon Barkley will finish as a running back one this season in 2022 NFL fantasy. Real talk, say it in my chest, you need to stop sleeping on Saquon. And if you're finally awakened and you're finally on the train, welcome aboard. But I still won't forget you talking down on him. And if you are still on the fence, even after everything that I just talked about, I'll just tell you this. My grandma has a saying. If it walk like a duck, quack like a duck, got feathers like one, it is not no squirrel, baby. I'm just saying this. If it walks like it's healthy, talk like it's refreshed, the workload looks like it's great, the talent is there, the situation seems to be improved, offensive line seems to be better, it is not a running back that's going to finish as running back 38 on the season where Jordan Howard, Darrell Williams, Deontay Foreman, Javonte Williams, Duke Johnson has more fantasy points per game than this guy. For context, he did finish the season. He did finish the season. But we have to have these conversations. So Real Talk, presented by Real Ones Productions, get started off with this. Stop fading Saquon Barkley. There's no reason why Saquon Barkley's ADP shouldn't be first round caliber, and it shouldn't be a reason why people are shocked that people are taking him in the first round. Could I make a case for 1.01 overall? Yes, absolutely. He has the explosiveness to do it. He's going to get the passing volume. He's already got the targets in the past. And if he just finishes, he played 13 games last year. You want to know other guys that didn't play that many games that are y'all are taking higher than him? Oh, Derrick Henry, 8 games last year. Okay, Alvin Kamara played 13 games last year. Dalvin Cook played 13 games last year. Elijah Mitchell, who everybody seems to love in the 49ers backfield, played 11. Christian McCaffrey played 7. Come on now. Let's have these conversations. David Montgomery played 13 games last year. So it's not about it. We have to understand and put context on everything. We got to put perspective on everything. Why? Because perspective matters. So on this Real Talk, Saquon Barkley will finish as a RB1 this season in 2022 NFL fantasy. Thank you for your time. Oh man, I love Real Talk so much. That's my favorite segment. Cause I have to get it off my chest, bro. I have to get it off my chest because I'm tired of all this noise about Saquon. All this Saquon Barkley is just a shell of himself. Saquon Barkley don't know how to get busy. Saquon Barkley, he don't have good quarterback. Saquon Barkley is this. Tell me what Saquon Barkley isn't all the time, but can't tell me what he is at all. That's Real Talk. Clap it up for yourself for making it through that segment. Clap it up. Yes, yes, yes. Clap it up. This is Fantasy Vibes, where perspective matters. Perspective is king because where you sit determines what you see, and what you see determines your outlook on a situation. I'll give you an example. This is why I say, if you go to the movie theaters, right? And let's say you went to go see Nope, right? I still haven't seen the movie, but you went to go see that, right? And you sit all the way in the front. So the screen is like this, like right there. So you got to look up like this the entire time in the movie. That is going to affect your experience in watching the movie. It's going to affect your comfort level. It's going to affect you even eating popcorn, drinking a drink. You're not going to be able to do the same things or even look at the picture, look at the movie in the same ways. Don't even get me started on if that movie was a 3D movie or IMAX. There's no way that you're going to be able to get the same experience because why? They say meet us in the middle, meet us at mid level. That's perfect viewing experience because you're not too high and you're not too low and you're right in the middle, so it feels like the images are like coming right at you. Where you sit determines what you see. I use the movie theater analogy because it can help put context on everything because if it applies to one, it applies to all. If it applies to movies, it applies to fantasy. If it applies to our life, it can be applied to fantasy. This is what we have to know. So, with real talk being out of the way, let's talk about some other things that's coming up on the docket. But before we get started, let me take a quick sip of water and tell you again, make sure you check out Real Ones Productions on YouTube. That's Real Ones Productions on YouTube for all of your content that you need as far as highlights. We got you covered on original content as well. And if you're a college football fan, you want to keep it locked. Why? Because this season we have college football kickoff coming to you in a bigger, brighter, and better way that you've never seen before. If you're a college football fan, again, bigger, brighter, and better. Make sure you tune in to college football kickoff this year, exclusively on Real Ones Productions. Let's get started into the second part of the show, which is undervalued but not forgotten. This is a new segment that I'm bringing in, but it's going to be talking about players that are undervalued but shouldn't be forgotten in the fantasy football world. Let's take a look at wide receivers. I did an entire real talk on this one player who finished as wide receiver 13 last year. Wide receiver 13 had 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns. He averaged 8.1 yards per target. You talk about routes, yards per route run, 10.1 yards per route. How many touchdowns did he have, Moon? Well, if you look at his receiving touchdowns, he had 9. 80% catch rate. He had a higher percent catch. He had a higher catch rate than Deontay Johnson, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Mike Williams, Stephon Diggs. Come on now. Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Debo Samuel, and Cooper Kupp. He had a higher catch percentage than all of them. Who am I talking about? Hunter Renfrow. He is undervalued, but not forgotten. If you see Hunter Renfrow in your drafts, do not fade him because of just the name. Oh my gosh, it's Hunter Renfrow. Watch the tape and look at this man cook. This year, I already talked to you about it. New head coach, Josh McDaniels, coming from the old Patriots background. I totally expect them to run a lot of 5 wide this year, a lot of multiple personnel. They will always be scheming. They will always be a step ahead of you. You'll never know what it is that they got coming on. You don't know what type of personnel they come in 1 week. You might see one thing one week. You might see another thing the other week. I understand that gives you a little bit cause to pause because it's like, where is the consistency in it? Well, the consistency comes when you realize that Hunter Renfrow is still going to be utilized. Hunter Renfrow right now is going late in drafts, late. But the guys that I just mentioned, that he has a higher, Hunter Renfrow has a higher catch percentage than all of them. That's a fact. You talk about fact and fiction. That's a fact. Higher than Deontay, Tyler, Metcalf, Williams, Diggs, Hill, Evans, Adams, Jefferson, Chase, Samuel, and Kupp. So you can't tell me that he's not sure-handed. His catch percentage speaks for itself. If you talk about highest in the league on players that actually get work, he's leading the league. Leading the league. Come on, bro. So I'm just saying, put respect on Hunter Renfrow, my man. Put respect on him. Another person, wide receiver, undervalued, but not forgotten. Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers. I made a post yesterday on my Twitter. You can follow me at FF_MoonVibes. That's FF_MoonVibes. And in that post, I talked about how Keenan Allen is the coldest and most underappreciated wide receiver in the entire NFL. And nobody can convince me otherwise. The reason why? This man had 157 targets last year as a wide receiver. That finished 8th in the entire league. Players that finished above him are all players that seem to be going above him in drafts. Tyreek Hill, DJ Moore, Stephon Diggs, Jefferson, Deontay Johnson, Devontae Adams, and Cup. The only ones that I can say that are right around that edge with Keenan Allen are DJ Moore and Deontay Johnson as far as ADP. But Cooper Kupp is going way higher than him. Devontae is going higher. Justin Jefferson for sure is going higher. Stephon Diggs is going higher. And even Tyreek Hill. And the new offense is going higher than Keenan Allen. He had 157 targets, Moon. How many receptions did the man have? 106. What? You mean to tell me that he's a lock for 100 receptions, over 150 targets, and we're projecting that Justin Herbert is supposed to take this big jump up without including the fact that Mike Williams is supposed to take a jump up. Keenan Allen, the actual wide receiver number 1, is supposed to be taking a step up. We got to make it make sense, people. We got to make it make sense. And I'm here to challenge your perspective because Keenan Allen can't stay healthy. He played 16 games last year. Now, I understand he had 6 touchdowns, but what person wouldn't take 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns in fantasy? I get it. I understand. But let me give you some context. A player that somebody people seem to love so much ever since he got traded to Arizona is Marquise Hollywood Brown. If I did a blind resume comparison and it said who, and I didn't reveal to what stats, you would probably be like, dang, I'll probably take player A over player B if I really did a comparison. Matter of fact, let's do it. Player 1, 16 games, over 145 targets, 91 receptions, 6 touchdowns, 1,008 yards, 7 yards per target. He had 11.1 yards route run on the season. However, he finished with 135.3 fantasy points, according to fantasydata.com. Player 2, 157 targets, 106 receptions, 1,138 yards, 6 touchdowns, 7.2 yards per target, yards per route, yards run on the route, 10.7. So not that far off, and 151.8 fantasy points. You talk about points per game. Player 2, player B, whichever one that floats your boat, has 1 point higher, 1 full point higher than player A. Who is player A and who is player B? Player A is Marquise Hollywood Brown. Player B is Keenan Allen. This is context for the people that love to use stats. Keenan Allen is a dog. Keenan Allen is one of the most underrated and underappreciated receivers in the entire NFL. And I'll look you dead in the camera. Keenan Allen, if you ever come across fantasy vibes, no, I ain't like one of these analysts that's out here that's going to be sitting here talking down on your name or don't want to look at the eye in the sky, because what? The eye in the sky don't lie, Keenan. Right? The eye in the sky don't lie. I know you had an interview recently with B. Marsh, and he was talking about how you don't set goals anymore because your only goal is to play 17 games. That's really all that matters to you. And I hope that you get a chance to play 17 games, because that's 17 opportunities for the world to get a chance to see 13 ball out. Everybody love the other 13, Odell, but they don't love you, the regular 13. Let's talk about it. Undervalued, but not forgotten. Another wide receiver who is undervalued, but not forgotten. If you asked me and said, hey, Moon, name me a wide receiver that had 10 touchdowns last year, but that gets so not in the conversation, I would be like, ding, 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 Adam Thielen. Now, I know, old man Adam, I'm not touching him in Dynasty, But dynasty is not redraft. Redraft is not keeper. Keeper is not dynasty. None of these formats are the same. And then if you start talking about DFS, DFS is different than all of that. Daily fantasy, emphasis on the daily. Adam Thielen had 10 touchdowns last year, but out of the players that had 10 touchdowns ahead of him, Cooper Kupp, Mike Evans, Jamar Chase, DK Metcalf, Devontae Adams, Jefferson, and Stephon Diggs, he's the only one that didn't have over 1,000 yards. He had a higher catch percentage than Diggs, Jefferson, Metcalf, Jamar Chase, Mike Evans. The only ones that he was trailing was Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, and Adam Thielen is right there. He only had 67 receptions, 95 targets. And now Minnesota is now into a new offense that seems to be more friendly. I watched the interview recently with Adam Thielen with Pat McAfee. He was talking about how rejuvenated, how energized he is heading into the season, how he loves coming to work, how he loves showing up, how he is in love with just the atmosphere and the accountability that each of these people in the organization are holding each other to. It seems to be new life and new love in the air in Minnesota. That means I have to look at Minnesota differently. However, people are still not giving him the love that he needs, and he is still getting passed up and forgotten about. Why? Because he's old. That's simply what it is. People keep banking on an Adam Thielen fall off, but what's the worst thing that they could hope for is for him to come out and say that he is feeling rejuvenated, feeling refreshed, and everything in between. That's the last thing that they would want. It. Adam Thielen, somebody who's undervalued but not forgotten. Honorable mention: KJ Osborne. Did you know that KJ Osborne had more touchdowns than Deebo Samuel, Keenan Allen, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Pittman, T. Higgins, Brandon Cooks, Jalen Waddle last year? And he did it in half the targets. Half. In half of the receptions. And let's just say his yards per route run was up there too. So if we're gonna sit here and talk about players that's like the Thielens, I gotta also mention the Osbornes as well, because he finished really 17th in the league in touchdowns with 7, and he was tied for what 17. So, hey, I'm just here for added context. Let's talk about it even more. Players that are forgotten about. Players that are forgotten about and undervalued. But I'm going to make sure that you do not forget them. The last one on the list that we're going to talk about for right now is a wide receiver who seems to be getting more love, more praise, more adulation just because we understand, well, people are starting to come on to how consistent he's consistently been. Like, he's been as sure thing as you can hope for. Last year, he finished as wide receiver 20. You said that, right? Yes, wide receiver 20. He finished 18th in the league in touchdowns. He had 6. He had 1,000 receiving yards. What you mean he had 1,000? He had 1,000. You know what's crazy? Out of his career, this man has had 1,000-yard season in New Orleans, 1,000-yard, 1,000-yard season in New Orleans again, 1,000-yard season in New England, 1,000-yard season in Los Angeles with the Rams, 1,000-yard season in Houston. Oh, 2 back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons in Houston. And last year, he had the highest receptions that he's had in his career. He's had the highest targets that he's had in his career. And he's right there as far as yards per target. Now, that was a little bit down because Houston's offense was a little bit down last year. You got to understand. However, he had 8.9 fantasy points per game. That's better than his season in his last season in LA. That's a fact. This player is Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks continues to get undervalued. But he should remain productive. He is working with a quarterback that is unproven, but he's working with him in year two. The Texans seem to believe in Davis Mills, so I'm going to continue to believe in Davis Mills. He's finished with 1,000 yards or more in 6 out of 8 seasons. When we talk about the Texans receiving weapons, he's clearly on the top of the depth chart. I know recent news has come out about the depth chart with Marlon Mack and Rex Burkhead being at the top, and Dameon Pierce is nowhere to be found. But let's just be honest. Brandon Cooks is a starter and wide receiver number one in this offense. He's wide receiver number one. If he's getting praise from his offensive coordinator are already saying, in quote, he brings a certain level of paranoia for our opponents, and that's going to open up the opportunity for us to balance our attack. If he's saying this, then that showcases to you how they plan on scheming and how the league looks at Brandon Cooks. It doesn't matter what necessarily we think about Brandon Cooks, whether he's old, he's getting up there. Players that keep doing it over and over again, we kind of get spoiled. We get spoiled at the fact that they're just so consistent. I understand he's 28. I understand that he was given a 2-year contract extension in April. I understand that his ceiling might not be the highest, but he is undervalued and shouldn't be forgotten in this season of fantasy. If you want to talk about wide receiver twos, he's a wide receiver two with wide receiver one upside if Davis Mills takes that incredible jump up that we hope for. I know I'm hoping for. It's so on the list of wide receivers that are undervalued but not forgotten. Brandon Cooks makes that list, as well as the other ones that I decided to mention on this episode. This is Fantasy Vibes. Coming up next in the show, let's get to it. We ain't taking any time off. Got about 30 more minutes to work with. Coming up next, Fact or Fiction. There's been reports coming out about this entire running back by committee situation that's coming out with Javonte Williams, and also that's coming out with Melvin Gordon. What do you need to believe, and what is fiction in the situation? Now, for me, I always have understood the type of talent that Javonte Williams has. I understand what he brings to the table. I understand that. But what I don't feel like people understand is the actual situation that comes when you have two running backs that can be there and actually handle the workload. Melvin Gordon, regardless of how we may think of him, can carry the workload in Denver. It might not matter what we think about Melvin Gordon, but it matters what Denver thinks about Melvin Gordon. Obviously enough to sit here and say that they're going to be splitting workload, splitting touches, splitting carries, things of that nature. I am not going to sit here and fade Javonte as far as dynasty and everything like that. That's one thing. But if we're talking about redraft, there's no way that Javonte Williams can be going as a top 2 round player in redraft and people not have to weigh the concern that he's not going to be getting a higher workload, and you're constantly projecting that Russell Wilson is going to come in and elevate the offense passing attack. If all of those things are true and everything we just talked about, then something has to give. So if we expect Russell Wilson to elevate the passing attack with Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, KJ Hamler, Albert O, and all the rest of these offensive weapons, including Greg Dulcich, we also have to understand that something is going to have to give. And this two-headed backfield that they are seeming to head into the season with is concerning from a fantasy perspective. From an actual football perspective, it makes sense. But from a fantasy perspective, Javonte Williams has a top 2 round projection right now as far as his ADP. There's no way that you can see this ADP and say in redraft formats and be like, whew, I feel totally confident in that. I feel totally confident in that. And that's not even mentioning the Broncos schedule and being in the AFC West. So, with that being said, is it fact or is it fiction? Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams actually being a 50-50 split or close to it? I'm going to say that it is fact. This is fact, bro. We just got to call a spade a spade. Coming up next, there was reports coming out today, as in today, August the 10th, that there's a guy in Minnesota who seems to be winning on every route in every situation. Every route in every situation. Um, he seems to have the nine. Who is this guy? Well, I thought you never asked. I'm talking about Jetta, Justin Jefferson. Do I believe this? Is this fact or is this fiction? I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say this is facts. Their offense seems to be way more uh, talked about this season than last year. Heading into from this preseason to last preseason, I have more confidence in the Vikings than I think that I ever have. And when you have 18 that can line up in all different types of positions on the field, you saw him last year. They did a little pitch play to him where he threw it. I expect more creativity. I expect more ingenuity from this offense. And I expect him to win on every single route. Why? Because he's entirely way too cold for him to be singled in one-on-one coverage, man-to-man coverage. It doesn't matter who he's going against. Even some of the top guys in our league, and I'll put respect on their name, but if you say, is he a challenge to have to deal with? Absolutely. That's why this is a fact. Justin Jefferson is apparently winning on every route in every situation. My only thought process is this. Well, I just hope Kirk Cousins can get him the ball. I can hope Kirk Cousins can get him the ball and be Captain Kirk like I know and like we love. And that's how I feel about Justin Jefferson. Fact or fiction, Justin Jefferson winning on every route in every situation. That's a fact. Coming up next. Coming up next, we have a player, two players actually, that seem to be, at least from people that I've seen, a lot of people seem to be unsure about these two guys. It's AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts. Now, the Tennessee Titans decided to move on from AJ Brown. They didn't want to pay him the extension. They didn't want to do that. They didn't want to give it to him. And it's understandable because it's like, okay, well, we're just going to draft the receiver and we're going to get your replacement and then we'll save money so we don't have to pay you. The messed up part about it is it's a business. And, you know, that doesn't mean that AJ Brown is not talented just because the team decided to move on from him and not pay him the money. But one man's trash is another man's treasure. And I'm banking on the fact that what was deemed as trash in Tennessee with Ryan Tannehill and AJ Brown is going to be treasure for Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown. They already seem to have a good rapport. They already seem Jalen Hurts, if I'm not mistaken, FaceTime AJ Brown right after the trade happened. They seem to have a good connection. They seem to both be leaders. They seem to both be alphas. They seem to both understand what the goal is and what the mindset is. So when I'm projecting just as far as talent, Jalen Hurts has never had a wide receiver in his NFL career that has been on AJ Brown's level, that can absolutely take the top off of a defense. He can work underneath routes. He has a number of different releases. He's very physical. He is 1 year removed from being mentored by Julio Jones. He is now in a situation where he is clearly the number one wide receiver. Jalen Hurts is in a situation where people are banking on him to take a big tick in production as far as passing. We already know what he is as a runner, but people are still undecided on whether Jalen Hurts can be that guy as far as a passer. This should help him a lot. You still have Devontae Smith, and Devontae Smith can be in the number 2 role. I'm still hearing good, positive things about Jalen Rager, and I just think that is interesting how the tables have turned all the way since the 2021 playoffs. What I'm trying to tell you is this: if you're sitting here banking on a failure for the Philadelphia Eagles and their experiment with AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts, then I feel like you're just going to be wishing and wishing for something that's not going to happen. I understand there's going to be growing pains. I understand that there's going to be chemistry and timing and getting all of that down. But when you talk about looking my way, I'm not going to say every play, but when I know that I can go to you and you can come through for me, when I know I got that dog alpha number 1 wide receiver, and I know he's on the outside, I can give him a single signal. I can understand that like people would look at that and say, well, he's gonna have to show me before I believe it. Well, where's the faith in that? There's not faith. That's completely opposite. I'm gonna have faith in Jalen Hurts because we already know what he is as fantasy. And if his production passing takes the uptick that we want it to, we could be looking at a situation where Jalen Hurts is in that range for quarterback 1 for this year in 2021, and AJ Brown could be more productive than when he was in a run-centric offense in Tennessee. That also needs to be mentioned. Philly is clearly saying to us, hey, listen, I understand at the back end of last year that we were heavily utilizing the run game, but they clearly went out and got a dog. And now they seem to be adjusting their mindset, especially after facing Tom Brady in the playoffs last year. And they couldn't do what? They couldn't pass the ball. They couldn't pass the ball. So they're trying to get better. So they make the addition that everybody wanted them to, getting Jalen Hurts a number 1 wide receiver. And then now people are complaining or being downcast about or making their projections minimize, their expectations minimize, because it's like, oh, well, I still don't believe in Jalen Hurts. Come on, bro. Where you sit determines what you see. And where I sit, I'm looking at a number 1 wide receiver right there. I'm looking at Alpha. I'm looking at him. I'm also looking at an alpha quarterback that both understand the goal. So why wouldn't they want to work together? Why wouldn't they want to compete together? Why wouldn't they need each other? This is why I feel like this match is a match made in heaven. So for fact or fiction, Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown will establish a great connection and complement each other well in 2022. That's a fact. No fiction. No rap cap, as they would say. That's it for this segment for Fact or Fiction for this episode of Fantasy Vibes. Let's get back to everything. All right. Let's go back to the big screen. And I'm going to minimize this frame. Put that out in the player. All right. Welcome to Fantasy Vibes. I'm your host, MoonVibes, and this show was cultivated in order to give and help educate people on fantasy football from a perspective where you have to think for yourself. We always talk about the eye in the sky don't lie. However, what needs to be said is that sometimes your mind can play tricks on you. Your mind can play tricks on you. So that's why we can't just go based off of analytics, or we can't just go based off of just numbers and everything. You have to match what you see in game film and what you see in analytics, and also match with that with what's actually going on in the situation with the business side of football. When you talk about just what's going on with the team, what's going on with the environment, all of it matters. It's not just one singular thing that determines the outcome of any player or any team. It's all a marriage of all of these different things, whether it's film, whether it's film study, whether it's analytics and a breakdown. Like, I understand that it's deeper than just the surface. So that's why we want to give you perspective. because perspective is king. Perspective matters. And in order to have perspective, you got to be able to look at things from multiple lenses, be able to look at things from one side of the perspective, and then be able to take those glasses off and say, hey, I'm going to look at it from another side of perspective too. The glass half full and glass half empty approach. But I want to make people just look at the fact that it's a glass. You know what I mean? You talk about glass half empty and half full, but we don't talk about the fact that it's a glass or where the glass is sitting. What angle is the glass sitting at? How much is the glass clean? We're not asking the questions. So for fantasy vibes, I pride myself on being that person that's going to ask the questions that need to be asked, give you the answers that from my perspective, that I think can help you find solutions and not problems. We don't want to just mention all these things about problems. We want to talk about solutions, talk about perspective. So that's why it matters on fantasy vibes. So coming up next in the show, we have a mock draft. I am about to go to sleeper as we speak right now and try to see if I can get into a draft in the draft room and claim a team. And I'm going to go through some rounds and we're going to go through the draft and see what kind of team can we build and what type of approach and draft strategy can we have. So I'm going to claim team 10 and we're going to go back. And shout out to everybody that's watching while we do this. Shameless plug. Shout out to Real Ones Productions for sponsoring this episode and every episode of Fantasy Vibes. And while I do that, let me share my screen with the good people that's out there. Someone else is sharing content right now. Well, that's not a good thing. We should be good. If it's not good, then we'll just save the mock draft part for another time. Yeah, we'll probably have to just save it for another time in the next episode. Because my share screen right now is not working for some reason. All right, so we'll just do this. We'll wrap it up there. But on this episode, I wanted to talk about players that are undervalued but not forgotten. In my real talk, I mentioned to you about why you need to be paying more attention and putting more respect on Saquon Barkley. And I also talked to you about some of the latest fact or fiction news between some headlines that's going out there. Now, if you appreciate this episode, if you love this episode, make sure you check us out on realonesproductions.com so you can find out more of my fantasy vibes content out here. And I would love for you to experience it. You can follow me on Twitter at FM_MoonVibes to connect with me and any of my takes, any of my things that you might agree with, disagree with, or even if you have any questions regarding fantasy. Well, I'd love to answer the questions for you. You can always reach out to me in my DMs. That's FF_MoonVibes. But if you really love this episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can never miss an episode. Stay connected with everything that we put out here because it's going to be coming to you fast. It's going to be coming to you furious. You hear me? Fast and coming furious. And hit us with that 5 stars because we greatly appreciate it. It helps with the extension of this podcast, try to get this out into more people's hands. And your review really help because they give people firsthand knowledge from you of what to expect or to even press play. So a lot of that impacts the growth of the podcast. So episode was going to be, short, but we got about 50 minutes in. So I'll send you off into your day. Be great today. Do something nice that you normally do for something like my boy KT always say. And like I always say, make sure you're not fading Saquon Barkley. Make sure that you understand that Keenan Allen is the most underrated and undervalued receiver in the entire league. And more than anything, make sure that you stay wavy, my friend. Peace.